All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have, spawning on Cloud Kingdom, the blue Zerg in the bottom left-hand corner, currently trailing his opponent 0-1, representing a Team Liquid.net. We have the one, the only, it is RET. Go follow him at AxeCrank. And over here in the top right, the red Protoss, go follow him at Liquid Ret, representing Axiom Gaming. Put your axes together for Crank. Did I say representing AxeCrank? Because that was bad.
I believe you did, but of course, that is fine. Nobody knows.
He is representing AxeCrank, but yeah, not quite in the way I wanted to say that. This is going to be a pretty entertaining game too, man.
It should be. It should be a great game. And the reason I feel that is just because Game 1 was pretty fantastic. Both these players have put out some great efforts, so we will wait to see what they're going to do. But Red, if he goes for a hatch first this game, I may actually have to high-five him when I meet him, because that would just be the ballsiest move ever. But in reality, I think it should be a pull into a hatch. The third base inevitably going to be the focal point, though, because it's really an open target for a Protoss player in this matchup on this map.
And a probe just going to be popping in to check out the timing for Ret's spawning pool. I can only imagine, yep, there we go. Ret probably not going to want to go for that hatch first this game after what happened in game number 1. So we are going to be going pool into hatch, and Crank setting all manner of waypoints at the hatchery to try and stop Ret from getting his expansion down.
It was such a pretty picture as well. It reminded me of, like, I don't know if you ever played in, like, science at school with those geometric shape drawing things, programs, but that just, it was reminiscent of it. But Crank, even amusing us with his rally points now. We've got the natural bases coming down for both players. There was a Nexus before Forge for the Protoss, and as such, economically speaking, he should be very, very comfortable going into the mid-game.
Yep, everything seems fairly normal so far in this game compared to the last game anyway. We have got the hatchery comfortably going down for Ret now. Crank probably won't attempt to cannon this game because the spawning pool is already up, so significantly earlier Zerglings can pop out as a result. Nexus into Forge, like you mentioned, Mattles, from Crank. And it looks like if everything goes according to plan, Ret should be taking his third pretty soon.
And that third base is really an important position for a Zerg player. You needed to stay economically ahead. But on Cloud Kingdom, with the two entrances to it, it can be a little bit difficult because ultimately, Protoss players like attacking that spot. They do in Wings of Liberty with the Immortal Sentry all-in. With the Mothership Core, they can be even less committed to it with the ability to mass recall. But it's just whether Crank goes for that or what sort of build he decides to do.
Yeah, well, we've seen a lot of different builds in PvZ so far. I mean, Ret going for Swarm Host in that last game. We saw some Pronosses previously go via Air Toss, for instance. Tempest, usually a reasonably good unit to get out. But like you've mentioned before, Metals, very difficult to get up to that Sky Toss composition without letting yourself be vulnerable in the mid-game. Very much like a Terran meching, which, of course, we hear quite a bit. And that's very, very valid. So instead, he went for a more traditional Colossus-based composition, and in that particular game, catching Ret a little bit off guard really worked wonders for him. Let's see if he does the same in game number 2.
So, coming down at the moment is everything we would standard see in any game of this matchup. So, my concern, or what I'd actually like to see from Crank, and not something I've seen as a PvZ in Heart of the Swarm, is actually an Immortal Sentry all-in. I don't think I've seen one of those come down yet. They seem to have fallen a bit out of favour. Instead, Crank, though, he's getting up his Stargate, and that is an interesting choice, I must say.
All right, so the Stargate going to be popping out in this particular game. Let's see what that's going to be for. I'm really interested to see if maybe he's going to try and go for some fast Oracle play. We haven't seen too much of that so far. None of this White Raw-esque special tactics for Oracles or anything like that. We've seen no mineral lines get absolutely cleaned out. In fact, today, we've seen Oracles pop in and kill maybe 3 or 4 probes, but nothing really major yet.
Well, those Oracles are definitely a good option should Crank want to take it. He could try and poke in, deal some damage, and if Ret doesn't have down a good Queen count or a Spore Crawler, it's difficult to deal with it. 2 Oracles do take down a Queen. So what we need to see, the other thing that the Oracles provide is once you're harassing, if you get a Mothership Core out as well, you can use the Mothership Core defensively to secure a very quick third, but it's going to be a Void Ray.
All right, so we got the Mothership Core and the Void Ray popping out for Crank at the moment. Rhett, in the meantime, is halfway through his Roach Warren. Now, of course, this isn't any sort of, oh no, he's going to make Roaches, there are Void Rays, therefore Rhett is lost, or anything like that. Roach is just a really good, sensible ground unit to be able to have in case of any aggression later on. It's a sound investment in infrastructure, but Rhett does actually need to scout relatively soon, and I think he's already seen the Stargate. Yes, he saw it building early, and if he didn't know about it before, he certainly knows about it now, because that Overlord is being tickled.
Now, as I thought, Crank is getting that third base secured very quickly, and that's the other thing, as I mentioned, the Mothership Core allows you to do, but the Oracle follow-up. Rhett knows that the Stargate is there, knows there's a Void Ray out, and is now building the Spore Caller, so this is really going to shut down Crank quite hard, and it's a big investment getting that Oracle, because aside from harassment, there's not too much they can do.
So this is very interesting. Crank not actually opting to go aggressive with this early air unit play. We see the Void Ray going across the map to harass the Oracle, going to be joining it in just a moment, and does it actually get seen by that Zergling? No, not quite. So we're going to be seeing a double-pronged harassment here with a couple of links going in towards the third base, but between the Mothership Core and the cannon, I think Crank's going to be able to hold on. All he wants to do is constantly harass while securing his third.
And that's a good plan, because ultimately Protoss players with 3 bases are very, very scary. We see Red going for the Roach Hydra style and actually getting the Groove Spines upgrade, which usually tends to be a more defensive play with the Hydras as opposed to trying to push across to deal damage.
Infestation Pit going down now for Liquid Ret as well, so potentially going once again for Swarm Host play. Could be a little bit risky given the air units already out on the map for Crank though.
Swarm Hosts, they can be good, and as we saw in Game 1, they did cause a little bit of problem for Crank, but Skytoss is very strong against them. The reason being is that Locust can't attack air, but with Corruptors in there, it can be difficult. And the only real way to deal with them then is with an Observer and Tempest. So we'll wait to see what Red plans to do. It could just be taking up to get a Hive for Vipers, though, because Roach Hydra Viper is great in the early, late game.
The other problem as well with Swarm Hosts is, of course, they waddle out around the map reasonably slowly, and that can actually be a problem. So the air units like the Oracle incredibly fast, and that just means that there's more mobility in that Sky Toss. And in the meantime, we actually saw the Oracle there use Revelation, by the way, to grant vision of those 2 Hydralisks down there from Liquid Ret below his Overseer for 60 seconds. So he knows that the 4th is up. He can see that Hydras are being produced, and pretty cool use of that spell there.
That is a brilliant use of that spell, and something that I haven't seen done very often. So Red really getting the Crank getting the max out of his new units and new abilities. But as we see, Red, he's getting up the Swarm Hosts again. He is getting up Enduring Locust, and the Spire, ready for the Corruptors, no doubt, will be complete shortly.
Muscular Augments and Enduring Locust popping out from Ret as well, so he is going to be going once again for a Ling Hydra Swarm Host style composition, but like you said, with the Spire in the background with a long-term view to those air units as well, and Corruptors seem like a fine choice.
There's also the hidden base for Red down in the bottom right, but it was spotted by the Oracle, and as such, Crank could go and try and take that out with just a couple of Zealots, or maybe just sending a Void Ray or 2 over there. But Crank, he's just getting that same composition, minus with the air units as well that we saw in Game 1, the Colossi out, just thinking, actually, do you know what? I'm going to engage these Swarm Hosts head on. But I'm not sure if he has seen them quite yet. I don't believe he's seen the Infestation Pit, unless I'm mistaken. And as such, it may come as a bit of a surprise to Crank.
Yeah.
Oh no, it has been scouted. It has.
Yep, okay. Great, yeah, so that has been seen. That's actually quite important there, so good spot there, Maddles. We have a little bit of a bottom right-hand side kind of hidden 5th base popping out here from Ret. And one thing I actually wanted to highlight at this point, if Crank pushes out with an army with 1 Observer, and he goes towards the 4th base of Liquid Ret, take a look at the minimap. Ret is only spreading creep on this half of the map. If that creep spread disintegrates and or the 4th base gets taken out, there isn't even creep at the moment connecting the natural and the 3rd base. So this might be a little bit of an area where Ret could be weak going into the late game.
The good thing for Ret, though, is he's got 15 Swarm Hosts out. And ultimately, when we see the Crank has only got the one Void Ray in terms of air units at the moment, he's got to try and deal with those solely with the Colossi. And as we saw in Game 1, they don't kill them that quickly, so what this means is basically that RET, if he gets in a good position and manages to contain Crank, it could be a bit of a problem for our Red Protoss player.
It could indeed, and this is that push I was talking about with an Observer, picking apart a couple of active creep tumors, and then seeing approximately 1.5 billion locusts chase him back. So Crank is not going to want to engage there just this second. Needs to make sure that he has adequate resources to deal with that. But pushing back the creep spread nicely, a lot of active creep tumors have just disappeared, and he's holding station very well on 4 bases.
So, Blink just about to finish. 3-3 upgrades half done for Crank at the moment. Meanwhile, only 1-1 for RET. He does have 2-2. About 3/4 done. The Hive coming out. But where are those Swarm Hosts? They are just still happily sitting by RET's 4th, but now just starting to scurry across the map.
Well, he needs to be careful not to overextend with them like he did towards the end of that last game. And very nice positioning there, retaking that watchtower. This is the point where creep spread would be useful for RET. Take a look at where the Swarm Hosts are. That entire section of the map has 0 creep spread on it, and that's just allowing Crank to get very, very close to where RET could be vulnerable before RET actually sees any of his army.
There's only one answer to that, and that is RET clearly is concerned about the environment and doesn't want to contaminate the entire map. He wants to limit it to what he needs, but we do have some Zealots. We do have some Zealots coming down to the bottom right base, but Hydras managed to cut them off and clean them up very easily. So nice little spot there out of RET.
And the number of workers at the moment, guys, in not quite true RET fashion, this might surprise some of our viewers here, 73 workers for RET and 82 probes for Crank right now. So in the game of drones...
Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a Zealot drop coming down in the natural base, and there's nothing there for RET to defend with at all, and they are killing so many drones, and more Zealots are going to be coming in to the main base, and RET is just going to push across the map.
Warp Prism as well in the main base, warping in a lot of Zealots there. That's a total of 11 more, and 4 more Zealots in the natural just haven't been dealt with at all. And RET, moment of indecision there. The Swarmers are stuck out in no man's land in the middle of the map. The Corruptors are streaming back. The Hydras are streaming back, but Crank is all over the main and natural right now. RET's still up at 187 supply, but 15, 16 workers killed and counting. RET is not a happy camper, and the Warp Prism also gets away.
That is one lucky Warp Prism. The moment for RET, he was going to go and just attack. You could see it in him. It's why he wandered all those units across. But when he saw that mass warping of Zealots to the main, he thought, no, I've got to get back and defend this. The Hive will survive, but we see that ultimately Crank has managed to kill 22 drones this game. That leaves this situation as actually being just 55 drones to 85 probes. Crank is so far ahead economically, it is insane.
And when's the last time we saw Liquid RET on 55 drones at the 18-minute mark of the game? It almost never happened. Zealot's now in the bottom right, cleaning apart this space here. A Swarmers is going to burrow and try and clean this up. The Zealots will win over that, but with the support of the rest of the army, he should be okay. Now, Crank has to be careful, though, because RET has significantly fewer drones right now, true, but that means his army supply can potentially be much higher for a while.
And that could be a small window of opportunity for RET, who ultimately does still have out 22 Swarm Hosts and 19 Corruptors. That is such a powerful force, and Crank, he's got to engage it a lot more carefully than he engaged the Swarm Hosts in Game 1 now. There's so many out, it's going to be tough just to walk all over him.
Swarm Host Corruptor is indeed the late game composition, and he does have quite a few. You mentioned that in numbers of about 10 or above, the Swarm Host can be quite useful. Well, Maddles, how does 22 sound to you?
It sounds like it is going to be very, very good, and burrowed up in such a great position. They're just outside Crank's 4th base. While there are some Tempests just hitting the field now, there is no Observer forward in order to grant that vision. But and also RET this game has got the Overseers there in order to spot any Observers that try to come over. So that means the Tempests do not have vision and are going to be unable to take out the Swarm Hosts.
One shot those Colossi with the Corruptors here, and RET is trying to siege himself up in a very, very advantageous position. Great storms on a lot of the Corruptors, but they're still on about 2/3 health. Crank is going to have to put a couple more of those out for them to be really effective. And in the meantime, RET continuing to spawn more Locusts towards this 4th base of Crank. A lot of them going forward. All the tanks, sorry, all the cannons rather, are completely gone now. But these Colossi are the one thing that stops him.
Now there was a beautiful storm just there from Crank on those Corruptors. The Tempest doing so much damage. The Stalker's trying to focus down the Corruptors because once they fall, the Colossi are safe and the Tempest are safe. And therefore, Crank can start moving out to deal with the Swarm Host. But as the Colossi count gets lower against those 2-3 upgraded Locusts, then actually they survive for quite a long time. They're dealing some good damage. But
massive warp in on the bottom right, Manos. Hang on just a second, and these Zealots are almost certainly going to be taking out this bottom right-hand base. So Crank has held at his fourth. The Swarm Hosts have retreated from RET, and all of a sudden the bottom right base is also forfeit. Crank is looking like he's taking a very comfortable hold over this game number 2.
That is indeed correct. That bottom right base now down, and that is a massive problem because Red, when he had those Corruptors there, he could make sure that those Swarm Hosts were not going to get sniped off by the Tempest, but now they've all but gone. There's 25 out now, but they're the reinforcements. This means that actually Red, he has got to be very careful now. He needs to really win here at this point because...
And Dark Templar in the main base. Maddles, the Hive is going down as well.
Thus is major problems, but it doesn't change the fact that Red, he's now really just got to win here and now, otherwise Crank is just going to be able to take the longer term game.
This is, I think, proving to be a little bit too much for Ret right now. If we take a quick look at the number of observers he has on the map, it is 3, but the DTs are now starting to spread out as well. So many drones have gone down here. There is no more Hive. This 4th base location is getting taken out by Zealots as well. The Hydras might be able to hold, but a lot of damage is being done.
The Swarm Host! The Swarm Host also walked straight into a line of Tempest. The Observer there as well, granting vision. That means that so many of them went down there. Crank, I think he's done it.
I think he might have done. Red currently down at 140 supply as Crank is still maxed out, struggling to hold on in this game. He is protecting the greatest fire with those Hydralisks, but I don't think I've seen a single Broodlord out on the map. Late game composition here, very in favor of Crank. Great multitasking as well, harassing the bases non-stop. 2 lone Zealots taking out the 4th base right now, and Red is falling apart.
Red has lost 54 drones this game. He's trying to move in with those Corruptors, but the Tempests are no match for that many. So Red is able to clean out some of this, but the ground army for Red is looking very small indeed. Only 10 Swarm Hosts now, not really enough to deal significant damage. Red does have a lot of gas and about 1,000 minerals, but the concern is always going to be the Crank is up on 5 bases.
Yeah, the real problem is Ret is taking out the Tempest, and Crank is saying, oh, well, thank you very much for that, because now I can actually remax and use my bank, which is precisely what he's proceeding to do. Ret is currently down at 61 supply, whereas even though those Void Rays are getting picked off a couple, Crank's still up at 160. Crank looking comfortable for this 2-0.
There should be a GG any second. Of course, Void Rays do good against Corruptors, and as a result, Crank deciding to build 8 at a time. And the reason they do so well is just with the prismatic alignment. They are so strong, and now Red down to just 50 supply. I don't think there's anything he can do now. And